when I was young, as student, I was introduced to the idea of alchemy. I was in college, and there was a professor who taught about alchemy, and what she taught was that the theory of alchemy is that we have two parts. We have an animal body and we have a divine soul, and they merge together to make a human being. And so the animal body is just really the beast. It's the what survives, what kills to eat, and what does whatever it needs to do to survive. And the divine soul is eternal, and it's actually just coming in to have a human experience. And it's been using this particular form, the body with the thumbs, with the intelligence, that has awareness of its own death. It's the defining feature of the human, is that the human knows, the human can look at death in the eye, and it can also stand as death, looking back at itself. And that awareness is a really distinctive feature of the human. And it highlights this quality between the soul and the body. And as I studied that, I was made aware that about 400 years ago, those two aspects of alchemy split apart, and science just went in along the direction of the beast, and was just into the material world, the physicalism, that science became the study of materials and movement and matter. And the expression of transformation that science finally developed was nuclear fission, became the expression of transformation. How do you turn one element into another element? And when that's done in a nuclear reaction, there's a huge release of energy. And that energy was then put into a bomb, and the bombs were dropped on 2 cities in Japan to end World War II. And so I studied this in college, the alchemy. I then studied the Los Alamos laboratory, and I did research about the director, the father of the atom bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, who was in charge of the Manhattan Project, which is where I grew up, in Manhattan. And he had been based there originally. And then a couple of years later, very suddenly and surprisingly, I ended up in his office at Los Alamos, hired by his successor, his like 4th successor. Oppenheimer gave me a personal services contract as a strategic planning consultant. And I did work on weapons development and strategic planning for the laboratory. And I did that work, and I got to see the inside of this nuclear weapons lab. A couple of years after that, I was part of the Cambridge Peace Commission. When I left the laboratory, I went and I helped form the city of Cambridge, created a peace commission, which was the first and perhaps the only one in the country, where they used federal funds that were devoted to a nuclear escape plan, and they used them instead to create a commission to end the threat of nuclear war. And that was part of the concept that we came up with, and we worked with the city council and the funding and everything, and we created that. And I became a kind of ambassador of the Cambridge Peace Commission, and I did this international trip. And I found myself on a ferry going from Greece to Israel, months into my trip. It started in England, and I went all through Europe, many stories, of course, but I ended up at this one point on this ferry going from Athens to Haifa. And on that ferry, I met 2 people who were planning to walk from Haifa to Bethlehem to meet the chaplain who had been the chaplain for the plane that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. He was a Jesuit priest. And in 1945, he had given the pilots their blessings before they got on the plane and dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And he then visited Hiroshima afterwards and saw that destruction, and then dedicated the rest of his life to ending nuclear weapons. And so he, at that point, was 65 years old. He had had multiple heart attacks, but he was very frustrated. He decided he was going to walk from Puget Sound in Washington State. He was going to walk to Bethlehem. And it took him 2 years to do it. Of course, you know, ferries over the water in places. But he was going to arrive on Christmas Eve in Bethlehem. We didn't know quite where he was or the group, but we were going to walk. These people I met on the boat, they said, would you like to, a little bit like Dorothy and the Scarecrow. And they invited me to come along. So I walked I think we arrived on December 10th and did that walk to meet him. When I arrived in Israel, I was very aware of my family's Jewish. My father had been a soldier in World War II, a U.S. Army soldier, but he had stayed on in Germany after the war and worked very intensively with Jewish Holocaust survivors coming straight from the concentration camps, and helped many of them settle in what had been Palestine and then became Israel. And so arriving in Israel, I was just very aware of the story of the Holocaust and the creation of Israel, and had this great interest in what it would take to make peace. How could the Jewish people and the Palestinian people live in peace? And that was my purpose in coming there. And I did this walk. So we decided we were going to walk through the West Bank rather than walk along the coast to Jerusalem and then into Bethlehem. So we entered the West Bank at the north, and I ended up living there for 4 months. It completed the walk on Christmas Eve and then stayed there for 4 months. And what I saw from inside Palestine, living in Palestine for those 4 months, living in Bethlehem, was I just really saw the perpetration of the Israeli Jewish people against the Palestinians, how the script had really been flipped. And the story that I had known about the victimization of what had happened in the Holocaust and what Hitler had done to our people and the concentration camps and the 6 million and the miracle of Israel and all of that, how it had really been turned on its head to live in Palestine and to see the Israeli soldiers and the way the Israeli soldiers treated the population there and the way that they were characterized, and especially in comparison to the people that I was living with, who did not match in any way the way that they were characterized. And so it really brought me into contact to look at my own perpetration, to look at my father's perpetration, look at the perpetration of how easily it is for victims to become perpetrators, and for perpetrators to also be pulled into their own victimization, and how this just all circulates inside of us. This is part of the larger human condition of this animal body and this angelic soul, that this is how it gets expressed in war and in conflict and violence and malevolence. And I still was very interested in the tools for peace. How could we come to peace? And so 15 years later, I discovered constellations. I was really interested at that time in finding the missing tool in the Peacemaker's Toolkit. I had exhausted all of the known tools, and none of them could really deal with the core of what ignited in Palestinian people and what ignited in Jewish people when they could not come to reconciliation with each other, when it really broke down into hostility and violence. And that's how I came to constellations. And part of that is the way we're in relationship with our own perpetration, our masculine perpetration and our feminine perpetration, our victimization, our masculine victimization and our feminine victimization, and how those live within us, how we deal with them, how they move us forward and how they hold us back. And that's what we're going to explore tonight with you.